Thank you. Good afternoon, chiefs, elders, community members, and youth. My name is Eileen Lyons. I'm the special education specialist for Treaty 8. I've been in Treaty 8 for 11 years. I'd like to introduce Gloria Liche, Director of Education, North East Tribal Council. Gloria is also a member of the Special Education Subcommittee. And Casey McKenzie, Director of Education, Tall Creek Tribal Council. We're going to start off with a little overview on special education for Treaty 8. And we follow the intervention funding model where the focus is on programming. And the intervention funding model allows for the students to receive programming immediately. And the teachers are able to identify needs and put some programming together for the students. And the funding is received at the beginning of the school year. The funding, intervention-based funding, happens with the, first of all, per school, per full-time equivalent, and the EOP funding. The per school, every April the schools submit a letter, an intervention letter, and this letter identifies the number of students they expect to provide services for in the fall. The per-time equivalent is based on the nominal roll of the previous year. So for instance, this year the funding is based on the nominal roll 2014. And the EOP profound, the extraordinary profound funding is the assessment based, where if you have a severe student who requires one-on-one services, you have to submit an assessment and any other pertinent documentation for eligibility. The intervention-based funding per school, each school with a letter will receive $20,000. Per FTE based on the nominal roll, in this case 2014, each student receives $1,175, and per EOP 17,500. And this is per school funding. With the intervention-based funding, we have on-site compliance visits. And this is intended to ensure that the terms and conditions of the programs and services are being met. And this is for funding purposes. When we go in, I usually travel with someone from INAP, the Special Education Officer, and we visit the schools. We review the student files. IPPs need to be in place, signed, reviewed, the consents in place. And we visit this classroom, we meet the students, and we also have a wish list where if the school has specific resources they are looking for, we hope to provide. We look at providing those resources. With the compliance, I at Treaty 8 offer pre-compliance, and this is support from the Treaty 8 Special Education Department. I visit the schools, I help work with the principal, the special education coordinator. We look through the compliance handbook, we look through the checklists, and we go through the files. And just to prepare for the compliance visit with INAP. In September, the student population within our schools was 3,066. And this is current data from October 2015, which is our first reporting period for special ed. So the total student population was 3,016. The total special ed students identified was 624. We had 433 mild moderate, 157 severe, and 34 EOP students within the Treaty 8 schools. This is a breakdown of the specific disabilities that were identified, and you will notice that the high number falls into the mild moderate cognitive category. 433 mild moderate disabilities, and this is a breakdown of the different categories. Severe disabilities, the high number falls into the severe behavior at 52, with a total of 157. This is a breakdown of all of the severe categories. Extraordinary profound, in October we had 34 continuing extraordinary profound students with 20 new submissions for students. And of that 20, I believe at least 10 will be eligible. This is another for extraordinary profound. This is just a look at what we have right now in special ed, and here's contact information. I've got Kyle Lamont, Manager of Student Service, our email address, and myself, and our telephone number. So looking at all of this, we were wondering, what is this working for our kids? And is there something else that we could be doing? Is this approach working? Because we looked at one of the main barriers is the funding in the schools and the lack of resources. We also looked at the high dropout rate and student retention and student attendance. So thinking about that, we invited some resource people to get together and talk about this. And one being John Walker, who has worked with some of the communities. And John Walker is a pediatric occupational therapist with 30 years working with First Nations and Child Family Services in Alberta. He provides in-services and inclusive coaching for teachers. And at the time, when we brought a few people together, he was doing some work in North Peace Tribal Council. So I have invited Lori, Director of Education for North Peace Tribal Council, to talk about some of the work that John has done.
Thank you, Eileen. I ask the Creator to inspire my mind, guide my words, and to open my heart. What I have to talk to you about is something that's very dear to my whole teaching career, and it's very coincidental that it happened with John Walker coming up to do work in the schools in the North Peace area. He came up for the special ed students to give the adults who were working with them, namely the teacher assistants and people from the community, strategies and techniques on how to work with the students the best. But what he found was something totally different. We spoke about trauma this morning, and what he found in his course of traveling the schools is that approximately 2/3 of the students are displaying some form of trauma. And that goes back to the residential schools, that goes back to the intergenerational being marginalized. So that was quite a high rate. So his job was to stabilize. It became stabilizing the students, showing the staff how to stabilize them. Because you can't learn something if you're worried about some extraneous things, right? If you're worried about if your mother is all right, or if your uncle's coming over, 2 + 1 doesn't make too much sense in your life. So he worked with the school staff, and he ended up working with the teachers as well on focusing on relationships. His main theory is that relationships is the key to having a good, solid school. So So the first thing he found was that the number of children showing trauma was quite high. The second thing he found, which he wasn't expecting to find, was that the teachers were similar. And we spoke, UFC was here, speaking about their new program. Teachers are coming very young, quite often from far away, and they have not been prepared for the skills of dealing with traumatized people or dealing with trauma-related behavior. As are the teachers coming are young, they're coming to a new community and usually a new part of the country, and they just have not been shown yet. So they are coming to your community with all good intentions, and unfortunately for the universities, when you graduate from university, you think you know everything. So young teachers also come with that mindset, which does not help in your communities, because it's very hard for them to think that the teacher assistants are the ones with the knowledge, that the parents are the ones with the knowledge, and they really are. So I think that's a place that Treaty 8 can come in very handy, is having a program for teachers to undergo before they go into the community, so that they're aware of what they're doing. They're also under the illusion that they're running the white system school, and they're the knowledgeable ones, and that's a fault of the system. And that's why it's important for what Chief Billy Joe said this morning, is that First Nations need to outline and stand firm on their expectations and on what they want. So anyway, John, throughout his travels, found that teachers were also being stressed out because they just didn't know. I didn't hear them mentioning from the UFC that they have, that they're teaching the teachers how to deal with trauma-related behaviors. I didn't hear that. And that unfortunately is a part that stabilizes the kids, which enables them to learn. So he has spent a lot of time with that, because the teachers were blown away. They didn't know. So I would like you to know that your teachers are trying, but they are coming without the prerequisite skills sometimes, which leads them to run away soon. And that's your teacher retention. So when they can't, if they don't fall on to the idea of building relationships in the community, they get frustrated and run away. And then your children start seeing a new face year after year. And that doesn't lead to stability. I had a couple girls ask me one time, how come she didn't come back? She doesn't like us? And that's how kids see it. So I let them know, no, her mother was sick and she had to go spend time with her. But the kids see it, the kids personalize when teachers don't stay. So when the next ones come, the guard is a little bit up. And that takes away the sense of belonging that kids need before they're able to learn 2 + 1 = 3. So there's so much work to do just at the basic level in our school systems. And I do believe it needs to be First Nations driven. These are your children. You know how you want them to be as adults. And it's your values and your traditions that are important. The last thing was that he found that the agencies are not working well together. Counseling needs to be an integral part of the schools, but the health department says there's not enough money. The Indian Residential Schools Call to Action, their counseling only goes for a short time. Tomorrow during the special ed, we'll be looking at the trauma that's happening with kids through no fault of their own and not the parents' fault either. But this is something that we really need to look at and to heal parents and children in a family. So from having an occupational therapist come to our area, we've come to understand the prerequisites that we need to have in place to have children be able to come into the classroom and to focus on their learning.
Good afternoon. I'm Casey McKenzie. I'm the Director of Education for Tall Cree Tribal Government. John came to our schools during the 2014-15 school year to help us out. Our elementary school, Chief Tall Cree Elementary, is a small school. It has about, at that time we had about 60 students. We're located about 80 kilometers south of Fort Vermilion on Highway 88. And as Lori had indicated, 2/3 of the students are experiencing trauma, and that trauma manifests in the classroom in different ways. So what was happening is students were getting into fights, they were bullying, they were running away, they were climbing out the windows to run away, they were having tantrums in the halls, there was oppositional defiance, absenteeism. These are some of the things that we were experiencing, and of course, as those behaviors increased, the level of stress with the teachers and the staff and the TAs also increased. So it was just building one on top of another, and it was becoming very, very difficult to be within the schools. So John came out to observe what was going on and to make recommendations. We really didn't know what he was going to do. We thought he was coming out to work with the children, but we soon learned that he doesn't work with the children directly, he works with the adults around the children. He teaches us how to interact with the children in a way that stabilizes them and creates a better environment for them. We call him the child whisperer, but really, he's the adult whisperer. So one thing that he noticed within our school, of course, that we didn't have those connections, which Chief Levican had spoken about earlier this morning. And another chief had talked about building trust. These are the things that we needed to work on in our school. For the 2 years prior, our schools had experienced at least 80% turnover in our staff. That's a high amount. It's a high number. So of course, our students weren't building any kind of connections with the teachers that were there. But the people that were remaining in the schools were the TAs. They were the local staff. So he recommended that we work on building those connections with those TAs and with the support staff within the schools. That's where he asked us to start. So what he recommended that we do is that each TA within the classroom take a small group of students, of 2 to 3 students at a time, out of the classroom for 10 to 15 minutes, twice a day. And that TA was to work with the students, but not in any academic way. They were just to build connections. So they were to play with the kids, talk to the kids, do storytelling, drumming, singing, yoga, whatever it was that TA really enjoyed doing, that's what they were asked to do with the students. Now the other important thing that he had asked us to keep in mind was that the opportunity for the students to come out of the classroom was not contingent on their behavior. So if the child or the student had misbehaved just 2 minutes before they were supposed to leave the classroom to go with the TA, they still got to go. So that was very important. So we tried to get that going. Now we were not quite as successful as we had hoped to be within the programming of it. Part of that was due to our school being so small and not having enough space for 4 TAs to work 2 to 3 hours a day independently with small groups of kids. But we did start that program, and we also gave permission within the classroom, which was really important. We gave the teachers and the TAs permission to build on those connections before working on the lessons. We let them know that that was the most important thing that they had to do in the classroom. The lessons would come if they could build that connection and build that stabilization within the classroom. And it worked. We saw a drastic reduction within behavior quite quickly. Our attendance has increased, our staff turnover. This year, we had 80% of our staff return. A huge turnaround. Children are happier. They enjoy being in school a lot more. Our enrollment went up. The tantrums went down, the fights have gone down, and we know that it's building connections that's really important within our schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Casey. Over the last year, John facilitated special ed subcommittee meetings, and we looked at special ed Treaty 8 inclusive education vision, and what does inclusive education mean, and what would an inclusive education model look like for Treaty 8? You have a discussion paper in your packages titled New Directions in First Nations Inclusive Education. And this is a result of the special education meetings over the last year. The next step is to continue exploring Treaty 8 inclusive education model and looking at how we can make learning more child-centered and ways to stabilize the child in the school, the classroom, and in the community. So more research-based documentation needs to be done, and over the next year that will start taking place. So we will probably have more information and hope to have more information and documentation for you within the next year on this exploration we are doing for an inclusive education model. Thank you. And thank you, Casey. Thank you, Laura.
I'll get going while my better partner sets it up for me here. My name is Kelvin Wood. I'm with the Canadian Accreditation Council, and Dr. Sander is with me as well. We've been asked to partner with Treaty 8 in terms of developing some standardized standards and accreditation process. But before I do that, I just want to recognize the Grand Chief and, you know, the elders that are here. You're going to play a very important part in terms of how things are shaped and move forward, and the chiefs that are here that are bringing leadership and guidance, and all the honored guests that are here today. In terms of, as I was saying, we've had the opportunity to partner with Treaty 8. We have a standing steering committee, and I was wondering if I would like to just recognize them as well. So, is there any members of the steering committee here? If you could stand so we can recognize you. I see Rita over there. Gordon was here earlier. We've got, here we go, there's a couple back there. These individuals, thank you. These individuals have done a really good job to kind of guide and to speak into the process. And what I'm doing here today is going to be providing you with a bit of an update. Now, Canadian Accreditation Canada, just as a way of an introduction, is that we're an Alberta-based accreditation body. We started out developing standards and then accreditation process in the 70s, and we've been active in Alberta since that time. 2010, we began to spread out and become more national. We worked with Health Canada on a number of different fronts in terms of community health centers and nursing stations and addiction centers. We also work with the County Homeless Foundation and the military in terms of the accreditation process with them. So we have developed some expertise and experience coming alongside various sectors to develop accreditation processes and standards that are meaningful, measurable, and maintainable. And so that's our intent to do as well. But as we move forward here, yes, go ahead. As we move forward here, one of the things that I want to state is that standards will not guarantee a solution, no more than instructions within an IKEA box will guarantee it will be put together right. We've all been there, haven't we? Gone to IKEA and picked up the box and we took it out and the instructions were there. The instructions, standards are created not necessary to define the process, but really to give the framework in which the process of the outcomes is generated. Can I have the clicker maybe, or maybe let me switch. There we go. I'll just back it a little bit. This is better. I can get a flow here and then I can move forward. Oftentimes, we're like this lady, and although my daughters will contend that because they can put the IKEA furniture better together than her boyfriends. But as you can look there, she's looking at it and she's seeing all the pieces that are spread out in front of her and uncertain in terms of how to move things forward. Well, standards are like that. It's a framework that comes alongside to give some direction or insight in terms of how to put things together. The end process is not the instruction manual, but it is that product, which is that piece of furniture that is put together. And so when we look at standards, and as we have conversations about standards, we want to recognize that the standards are just a tool and a means to an end. And so as we are, as a steering committee, working together to collect and gather all the information, to look at different best practice models out there, to look at how we can develop a set of standards that is meaningful, that will measure things we need to measure, and make sure that once it's in place that it's maintainable and able to continue forward. In terms of accreditation itself, accreditation is a process of applying knowledge to experience, experience to practice, and practice towards outcome. Oftentimes when I come in and talk to people about accreditation process, their eyes kind of glaze over and they think, oh no, not another piece of paper I have to put together, not another meetings I have to go to. But when you break it down, accreditation is really applying knowledge, best practice models to experience. And that's translating it from paper into the day-to-day functions of your life. From that, it forms a behavior which becomes a practice that you do, and those makes your practice and further outcomes. So when we're looking at accreditation, it's really coming alongside to support organizations to move towards more quality assurance type outcome-based service delivery. And the definition of insanity oftentimes, you put a person into a round room and tell them to find a corner. And so often that's what happens with the organizations, is that they do the same practices over and over and over again and not getting the outcomes that necessary are changing and improving that organization to achieve the outcomes that are going to move them forward. And so within accreditation process, it is coming alongside to apply the standards of that knowledge base to experience, to practice, and then measuring outcomes through that process. Now, through these standards, we will be looking at establishing clear governance and management, data monitoring systems, and practice of policy embedded practice. When we're looking at governance and management, it's really about for the organization to create vision and to create clarity. So these are standards that will come into place to just help organizations, in this case schools, in their administration to have clarity and have focus and have a vision in terms of how things flow together. Data monitoring systems create understanding and progression. So oftentimes we do great work, and oftentimes in schools as teachers and so forth, we heard in the last presentation of the high level of turnover in terms of teachers. So you'll have a teacher coming in that may be there for a couple of years and does great work in establishing relationships maybe with the children, with the youth. But because it was based solely in that interaction, they move on and everything begins to fall down, and then the next person comes in and has to start from square one and to move forward. By having simple data management systems in there, it doesn't mean that you have to be rigid in it, but that there's clarity in terms of capturing what is really working in that environment, and so that it can be duplicated and it can be continue on to encourage the sustainability of the services that are being provided. Plus, on the other hand, as a school, you're able to capture those moments or those activities you're doing very well, so you can celebrate them with your with other communities as well as across the nation as well. And finally, policy embedded practice really helps to create parameters and certainty. So again, standards will provide these things in terms of not a set of regulations, but a clarity in terms of knowing the framework in which you are providing your services and you're conducting your duties within performing in the classroom there. Now, in terms of the process here, Dr. Santa, there's the blue book there. Can you link it up? We've already have created governance and management standards. Now, these standards have been vetted and they're in place. They've been through an international body which has accredited them. So they're internationally accredited with ISCLA. And so that base is already created in terms of that administrative structures and so forth that is in place. And those governance and management standards will cover those things that are identified up there in terms of creating that foundation in which good services can occur. The other part that we were working with here, let's see if we've got it. There we go. In terms of what we've been working with on the other package over there of standards, over at the table there, we have a package of standards here. These are draft standards that have been put together. Dr. Santa is going to come in a minute and look at some of the research that has gone into it. These standards will be the starting part. They will be worked on as we move into the next phase of development here. We'll be looking at really sitting around the table and having conversations about the standards and going through them and making sure that they are relevant and that they fit the communities in which these standards are going to be implemented. And so these standards will really look at how that relationship within the classroom and how that is moving forward. Dale has talked about getting clarity. So as we move into the steering committee here that we have started to develop standards, we have addressed what it should be in terms of what outcomes to be achieved, focus on the measures, core priorities, and values. And what's mentioned here a few times is that it is important that you just do not develop standards, but that you infuse value statements within the writing of the standards so that it carries that philosophy, that weight, in terms of how they're implemented into practice within the environment. focus of the standards, and that has been some conversation that we've had within the committee, is in terms of really understanding what the focus of the standards should be on. And there are many different focus, and the inclusive strategies and approach that has been talked about here can be integrated within the wording of standards to make it focused so it's more meaningful. It is important to have a mission or a vision in terms of what the standards are achieving. Remember what I said at the beginning, is that the standards is a tool and a means to an end. And so we look at the standards not necessarily as the product, but really as the means to get that where you want the product to be. We talk about how the subject matter experts and community involvement, research, pilot studies, and peer review, and then with a clear end time, which we're looking at piloting probably in the fall of 2016 here. We'll start the first stage here. As we've indicated, we're just in the final phases of the second phase there. We have had 2 sessions already with some of the stakeholders, as well as with some of the leaders within Treaty 8. They have provided some great insight and some great direction. We've had a session with the steering committee, who has reiterated a lot of the stuff that has been talked about in the room here today. A lot of stuff that has come out of the presentations. There's a very clear direction that seems to be coming forth in the development of these standards. In the next couple of months, we're going to have a couple of sessions where we're going to work on the standards to really refine them and define them and make them into a tool that is going to be useful as we apply it to the pilots there. That'll be the third stage in the fall, in which we will look at 3 or 4 communities in which we will come out and we will apply it probably in the spring of 2017. And then after that time, once the pilots are done and accreditation has been awarded, we will come out to the community and with a celebration. And we would like to, at that point, to sit down with some of the elders as well as some of the stakeholders within the communities and get your feedback and some direction that you may have, so that we can then put that back into the revision of standards as we move forward. And so I'm excited. This is a great opportunity. It's great to be a partner with you. I think the time is right to begin to move forward here in terms of creating some definition. And as the Chief spoke clearly, is that it's important that you take it on and that you give direction and that you provide a package and a product that is meaningful to you and that will lead you in the direction that you need to do in the care of the children that will over the next years and generations will come through the educational system, will benefit through the work that you're doing. At this point, I want to just quickly turn it over to Dr. Sanders. She's the brains behind the operation here. She does a lot of research, and so I will turn it over to her. Thank you very much.
First, thank you for the invitation. It's a privilege to be a part of this meeting and this ambitious work. I'm going to talk about some of the milestones and some of the, let's say, development in the process of developing the program guidelines that you will find within the meeting discussions. And it's a draft, and we'd like to say what were our guiding principles and what were the literature review that we did to prepare the international standards for the program. Coming from a background from the UN system, I worked last 8 years within the UN system. So I'm familiar with the UNESCO, which is the UN system working to improve the education program all over the world. The UNESCO focus on the learning outcomes, and there are stages how to improve the learning outcomes. Like it said, the guiding, the context in which the countries can develop their standards and improve the learning outcome of a community or a country. The phases include diagnosis and analysis. Where are we? What are the policies? What are the situation? What are the challenges in the education system? The second stage is to ensure that the achievement of the intended learning outcomes, whether it is policies or curriculum development or training, are in place within the country. And the third stage is the adjustment of education outcomes. And this comes by improving the capacities of teachers, assessment, learning environment, and enabling environment within the education sector. Now, one of our resources also is the Council for International Schools, and this is a worldwide program for accreditation. It's for communities where expatriates have children within other communities, and it's a good package of standards and applied in many countries, and the components include the school guiding statements and the teaching and learning, governance and leadership, faculty and support staff, access to teaching and learning, school culture, and the operation system. There were a lot of literature review that I collected from at local level, provincial level, national level, and at global level. The committee had studied all the literature, the research, and the documents prepared, and the best practices applied in many other countries, like in Alaska, in Australia, and in the US. There are many good practices to improve a culture-responsive education system and standards. It's a long list of documents and websites and links and resources, and you can find it within the package. The presentation is included, and you can get the documents and look at it. UNESCO, UNICEF, the Sustainable Development Goals, now it's changing from the Millennium Development Goals to Sustainable Development Goals for the upcoming 15 years. And the learning outcomes, it's a global resource. Many documents were based on research, and others were based on academic involvement, such as the British Columbia University, the Calgary University, Saskatchewan University. So all these documents are very rich in experiences and in setting the learning outcomes for the communities. Now, during our work within the committee, we drafted a plan that will be discussed on January 26. Now, the plan of action is still a draft, but it sets the stage for the upcoming 3 years. Where do we go through the 3 years? And it includes 2 objectives, like by the end of 2016, standard package for the Treaty 8 First Nation Aboriginal Community Schools is developed and piloted and tested, and by the end of 2018, Treaty 8 schools engaged in the accreditation by internationally recognized standards. It's a process, it takes time, but I think it's very worthy, and it's a system approach. Now, some of the expected results, there are intermediate expected results and the ultimate outcomes and the impact. Some of them will appear within 2-3 years, and others will take much more time to look at the expected results. Some of the expected results that we think might be achieved by this process is that the Treaty 8 schools would achieve accreditation standards that are recognized internationally. schools, teachers, curriculum, and teaching methodologies are more responsive to cultural norms and beliefs. Education outcomes witness improved continuation rate in high schools and universities, decrease the dropouts from the system, and increase the academic performance of the students, and more satisfied and inspired students achieving goals in life. Now, CSC has two main functions, the support services and the accreditation. The accreditation program has steps that Calvin went through them. And in addition to the accreditation program, there is the support services. And the support services build the capacities of the schools or the organization to be prepared for the accreditation process. So, of course, there is a need for documents, policies, and to review the main challenges, the infrastructure, what is needed. So the support services would do the gap analysis and come up with a plan, training programs to prepare the services for the accreditation. And it's a continuous process. It's not audit, it's not evaluation, it's a continuous process of improvement. So if the school did not meet all the standards, there is 6 months period where they work on improving the missing parts and to be accredited. So it's a process of improvement, it's not a stop sign. Now, CSC worked on a framework, and this framework is a system approach where we look at the accreditation process and the organization in a system lens. So its components is the inputs, and the inputs are the guiding statements, the policies, the financial resources, the human resources, the supplies, the curriculum, the accreditation standards, many others. These are examples. And the processes that is ongoing within the system, like the teaching methodologies, the gap analysis, the training, the curriculum assessment, the consultations with elders and the communities, which all will lead to the outputs. And the outputs expected is accredited schools, better achievement outcomes, increased enrollment rate, and decreased dropout rates. Education system is more responsive to culture and norms, satisfied person served, and better education outcome. Of course, this is a partnership and it is a teamwork. Nobody can do all this alone, but it's a work of everybody, all partners together and between all sectors to be a successful and to see the leadership in this program. And thank you for your listening.
Just want to close up with this. Won't keep it too long. But in terms of when we talk about cultural norms and so forth, you're the experts for that. But we're looking at, in terms of developing ways of knowing, ways of being, incorporating that somewhat within the process, within the methodologies and approaches that are used within the application of standards of practice there. But thank you very much for being very attentive, and I'll turn it over.
I'd like to say thank you to the panelists today in talking about standards and inclusive education.